Today you're going to be learning all about square roots. To square a number, you're going to find the product of that number multiplied by itself. So you've done that before. You know that squaring just means multiply it by itself. So the square of 2 is 2 times 2, which is 4. The square of 8 is 8 times 8, which is 64. The square of 10 is 10 times 10, which is 100. To find the square root, it's the opposite. So you must find the number that is multiplied by itself to get the number that's given. That's what you do to find the square root. So for example, 16 square root is 4 because 4 times 4 is 16. A perfect square is any number whose square root is a whole number. Okay, so for example, 16 is what we consider a perfect square because when you take its square root, you get 4, which is a whole number. So we're going to list the perfect squares I know from least to greatest. It would be really helpful if you guys learn these perfect squares because we're going to be going into something that requires you to be able to recognize a perfect square right away and take its square root as part of a simplifying process, which is a huge part of the algebra curriculum. And it would be really nice if next year you had it down so it would be easier when you get to that part of the unit. Okay, so perfect squares I know. We're going to list 1 through 20's squares. So, for example, 1 times 1 is 1. Therefore, 1 is a perfect square. Two squared is 4. Therefore, 4 is a perfect square. 3 squared is 9. So 9 is a perfect square. 4 squared is 16. So 16 is a perfect square. 5 squared is 25. So 25 is a perfect square. 6 squared is 36. 7 squared is 49. 8 squared is 64. 9 squared is 81. 10 squared is 100. 11 squared is 121. 12 squared is 144. 13 squared is 169. 14 squared is 196. 15 squared is 225. 16 squared is 256. 17 squared is 289. 18 squared is 324. 19 squared is 361. And 20 squared is 400. So hopefully you were able to fit that a little bit better than I did. But those numbers on the bottom part are what we call our perfect squares. Because once again, if you take their square root, you have a whole number. So again, I can use this even to help me figure out the square root. I can find my list on my list the number 196. I know the square root of 196 is 14 based on this list. I can find from my list the number 64. I can take the square root of that. I know the square root of 64 is 8 based on my list. I see the number 256, and I see from here that the square root of 256 is going to be 16, and so on. So all the numbers in between those are not perfect squares, and we can use this list to help estimate the square roots of non-perfect squares. And as we learned yesterday, the square roots of non-perfect squares are irrational. When we take their square roots, we get a non-repeating, non-terminating decimal. Therefore, they are irrational numbers. All right, so I'm going to go through the first couple examples with you before you're on your own. So let's take a look at numbers, or first the examples here. So for A, we have the square root of 40 is between 6 and 7 because it falls between the numbers 36 and 49. So if you look up at your list again, 40 is between 36 and 49. The square root of 36 is 6. The square root of 49 is 7. Therefore, square root of 40 should be between 6 and 7. And I can prove it. If I do the square root of 40, I get 6.3245 and so on, which is between 6 and 7. Then the square root of 152 is between 12 and 13 because it falls between the numbers 144 and 169 on our list. So again, square root of 144 is 12. Square root of 169 is 13. So the square root of 152 is between 12 and 13. So again, I can prove it. I do the square root of 152, which is 12.3288, which is between 12 and 13. All right, so let's do some practice here. I'm going to do the first 6 with you. So for number 1, I have the square root of 54. So if you're looking up at the list, square root of 54 falls between 49 and 64. Square root of 49 is 7, and the square root of 64 is 8. So the square root of 54 is between 7 and 8. And again, I can prove it. 54's square root is 7.34846, and so on, which is between 7 and 8. Now I have the negative square root of 13, and all that means is I'm going to negate my answers in the end. 13 is between 9 and 16 on my list. The square root of 9 is 3, and the square root of 16 is 4. So the negative square root of 13 is going to be between negative 3 and negative 4. And again, to prove it, I could do clear and square root 13, which is 3.6. And if I negate it, it's negative 3.6, which is between negative 3 and negative 4. Next one, square root of 132. Well, 132 falls between 121 and 144 on my list. The square root of 121 is 11, and the square root of 144 is 12. Therefore, 132 is between 11 and 12. Number 4, again, we have a negative square root of 89, so we just got to remember to negate our answers. 89 falls between 81 and 100. The square root of 81 is 9, and the square root of 100 is 10. So the negative square root of 89 is going to be between negative 9 and negative 10. All right, I'm going to do 2 more with you. Numbers 5 and 6. So for number 5, we have the square root of 38. And from our list on the opposite side, square root of 38 is between 36 and 49. The square root of 36 is 6, and the square root of 49 is 7. So 38 is square root is going to be between 6 and 7. All right, last one with you. We have the negative square root of 98. So 98 is between 81 and 100. So its square root is between 9 and 10. And it's negative, so it's between negative 9 and 10. Okay, so you're going to try 7 through 10 on your own. You can pause now and do those first, or you can come back to it after I'm done with the one example word problem. Okay, so down to number 11, we have Mrs. Cotton is sewing a square tablecloth that measures 16 feet squared. What is the length of each side of the tablecloth? So we have a square, which we know all the sides of a square are the same. So this is going to be x, this is x, this is x, this is x. We want to find the length of each side of the tablecloth, and we know that it has an area of 16 feet squared. Well, a square, to find its area, is just x times x, which is x squared. X squared is 16 in this case. So all I do is take the square root, and I get x equals 4. So her tablecloth is 4 feet by 4 feet. Done. So you're going to try 12 on your own. You can go back and finish the rest of the worksheet and make sure you get it all done before the end of the period and before starting your homework.